Empires never die in the thunder of war. They die in the whisper of debt, not with explosions, but with signatures, 1,000 ink-stained promises traded for one more year of comfort. And when the final creditor knocks, there is nothing left to sell but the illusion of power. Debt is not just a number. It is faith that tomorrow will be richer than today. And when that faith collapses, the empire follows. Every civilization begins with abundance, a new frontier, untapped resources, and a sense of destiny. In those early years, people work, trade, and build. Wealth flows like a river, but prosperity breeds comfort, and comfort breeds the illusion that growth will never end. So governments borrow, kings borrow. Empires borrow not out of need, but out of habit. The debt spiral begins as a whisper in the treasury and ends as a scream across generations. There are three great warnings written in the ruins of history, three empires that rose to unimaginable heights, only to collapse beneath the very system that sustained them: Rome, Spain, and Britain. Each believed they were the exception. Each thought their power eternal. And each proved that debt is the quietest executioner of empires. The Roman Empire was built on conquest, and conquest paid for itself. When legions marched, gold followed. New lands meant new taxes, new slaves, new spoils. Rome's economy expanded as its borders did, but the human appetite for glory is never satisfied. By the 2nd century AD, Rome was no longer a lean republic of farmers and soldiers. It was a sprawling organism that consumed itself. Armies grew too large to feed. Senators grew too rich to resist, and the treasury, once overflowing, began to echo hollow. So emperors turned to debasement, an ancient version of money printing. Silver coins were melted down and mixed with cheaper metals. The people still saw money, but its soul was gone. Inflation devoured wages. Soldiers demanded more pay. The government borrowed to appease them. Debt became Rome's invisible barbarian. While the frontiers fought Germanic tribes, the empire rotted from within. To distract the people, emperors offered bread and circuses, free grain, grand games, the illusion of prosperity. But every loaf handed out was bought with borrowed silver. Every gladiator's blood spilled beneath the Colosseum was paid for with debt. In time, Rome's currency collapsed. Traders refused the denarius. Taxes could only be collected in kind, livestock, grain, or labor. The empire, unable to pay its soldiers, hired foreign mercenaries. And those mercenaries, unpaid and unbound by loyalty, would later sack the very cities they were hired to protect. Rome didn't fall in a single night. It fell coin by coin, promise by promise. The final emperor was not overthrown by an army. He was bankrupted by his own system. When money loses meaning, what replaces it? If Rome died in silver, Spain drowned in gold. In the 16th century, Spain stood as the richest nation in Europe, not because of production, but because of plunder. Ship after ship arrived from the New World, their hulls bursting with gold and silver. To the Spanish crown, this seemed like divine reward. To history, it was the beginning of the second debt spiral. Easy wealth is the most dangerous kind. It breeds idleness. It blinds rulers to the difference between riches and productivity. Spain used its newfound treasure not to build industries, but to fund wars, endless wars, against the Ottomans, against England, against Protestant reformers, against rebels in the Netherlands. The empire fought everyone and borrowed from everyone to do it. At one point, Spanish kings were borrowing against treasure fleets that hadn't even left America yet. They mortgaged the future for the illusion of control. But gold cannot buy stability. As inflation soared, domestic industry collapsed. Why work when silver ships arrived each month? Why build when God himself seemed to refill the coffers? The merchants of Genoa and the bankers of Antwerp saw what the Spaniards could not. Spain's wealth was liquid, but its foundation was sand. By the 17th century, the inevitable arrived. The treasure fleets slowed. Pirates, storms, and rebellion cut the arteries of the empire. Spain declared bankruptcy not once, but 4 times in a single century, a world power begging for extensions on its divine credit line. The irony, Spain's collapse was not due to scarcity, but excess. They had too much gold and too little wisdom to use it. Debt, once a tool of ambition, became the instrument of humiliation. Spain's creditors seized revenues, dictated terms, and effectively ruled from afar. The empire of gold became a debtor's colony. if history always warns us, why do we never listen? If Rome borrowed in coin and Spain in bullion, Britain borrowed in faith. Theirs was the first modern debt empire, one powered not by conquest, but by credit. When Britain faced France in the early 18th century, its survival depended on financing war. But instead of looting or debasing currency, Britain did something revolutionary. It created trust. In 1694, the Bank of England was founded to lend to the crown, backed by the full faith of the public. Government bonds became the new weapon of empire. It worked brilliantly. While France taxed its people into rebellion, Britain borrowed its way to victory. Investors across Europe lined up to buy British debt, believing in the empire's future. Debt became the cornerstone of power, not its poison. For a time, as the empire expanded, so did its obligations. Navies, colonies, railroads, all financed through bonds. By the 19th century, Britain controlled a quarter of the world's landmass, but owed more money than any nation in history. Then came the First World War. Britain borrowed to fight, not in gold, but in promises. When the guns finally silenced, the empire was left with debts so vast that even its colonies couldn't sustain them. America became its creditor. The student had surpassed the master. And when World War II ended, the sun finally set on the British Empire, not because of invasion, but insolvency. In 1946, Britain owed the United States over $4 billion, a debt it finished repaying in 2006. That was the true end of empire, not the fall of colonies, but the surrender of sovereignty through debt. Can a system built on debt survive the loss of faith? 3 empires, 3 centuries apart. One pattern: abundance, complacency, debt, decay. Rome believed it could mint prosperity. Spain believed it could ship it. Britain believed it could borrow it. Each discovered the same truth. When debt becomes the foundation of power, collapse is only a matter of time. But here is where the story turns prophetic. Because there is one more empire still standing, still printing, still promising that this time is different. The one whose currency replaced the pound. The one whose debt is now measured not in billions, but in trillions. We think we've escaped the fate of the past. We think history bends to innovation, but numbers do not lie. And faith, whether in Rome's silver, Spain's gold, or America's dollar, always runs out. The only question that remains is the one history always asks when the empire of debt falls: who pays the bill? History doesn't repeat itself, it rhymes, and if you listen closely, the echoes grow louder with each passing century. Rome's silver, Spain's gold, Britain's credit, all different materials, but the same melody. Each empire believed its wealth was eternal. Each one built its power on the faith of others, and each was buried beneath the weight of its own ambition. But what happens when the faith itself becomes global? When the entire world runs on borrowed time? Let's go deeper. Let's follow the pattern across centuries into empires that thought they were smarter, safer, and more civilized. And yet, in the end, they fell the same way, quietly, predictably, and in debt. France, 18th century, a kingdom glittering with chandeliers and powdered faces. Versailles stood like a dream, a palace built not on stone, but on credit. Louis XIV, the Sun King, believed the treasury could orbit around his desires forever. Wars, banquets, theaters, armies, all financed through loans. France became a nation of elegance and extravagance, a society of appearances that hid a collapsing core. By the time Louis XVI inherited the throne, the crown owed half of all its income just to pay interest. The peasants paid in blood, the nobles paid nothing, and the bankers dictated the terms. Bread prices soared. The people starved. And one July morning, the crowd decided the debt was theirs. No longer? They stormed the Bastille and tore down not just the monarchy, but the illusion that a nation can borrow endlessly without consequence. Revolution, in truth, was a default, the oldest kind of bankruptcy when the people refused to honor the debts of their rulers. Across the ocean, another empire was forming, the United States, born not from kings, but from credit. The early republic borrowed heavily to win its freedom, printing continental dollars until they were worthless. Not worth a continental, they said, a phrase that would haunt the nation's future. Yet, unlike others, America learned to disguise its debt with innovation. The 20th century made it official. The dollar replaced gold as the world's foundation of faith. Factories, cars, suburbs, all built on credit. Then governments joined in, borrowing for wars, welfare, and endless growth. It worked for a time because belief itself became the currency. As long as the world trusted the system could print belief. But history never grants immunity. Even the most sophisticated debt machine has limits. Consider another example, the Ottoman Empire. Once the center of the world, its armies stretched from North Africa to Persia. But by the 19th century, it had become the sick man of Europe. Why? The Ottoman sultans, desperate to modernize, borrowed heavily from European banks to build railroads, armies, and palaces. They pledged future taxes, customs duties, even salt revenues as collateral. When the debt couldn't be paid, European powers took control of the Ottoman treasury. Do you see the rhythm now? Every empire begins by producing, then it consumes, then it borrows, and finally it collapses, not because the debt is too high, but because faith in repayment dies. Debt, at its core, is belief. It's a promise written in the language of time. And when the future stops believing, the present from Rome's coin to Spain's treasure, from France's monarchy to the Ottoman sultans, the outcome never changes. The moment a nation spends tomorrow's wealth today, it becomes a prisoner of its own illusion. Now, trace that illusion forward. After World War II, the world gathered in Bretton Woods, New Hampshire, to build a new financial order. The US dollar was crowned the world's reserve currency backed by gold, trusted by all. For a while, it seemed perfect. The pattern had been conquered. But gold is a chain, and when a system built on expansion hits a limit, it finds a way to break it. In 1971, President Nixon ended the dollar's link to gold. The world entered a new era, the era of pure faith. Money became an idea, debt became infinite, and belief replaced backing. For the first time in history, every major currency floated freely, untethered to anything tangible. It was a triumph of human confidence and the birth of the modern debt spiral. Governments realized they could print without consequence. Corporations learned to leverage without shame, and citizens were taught to borrow as a way of life. The system grew vast, complex, and self-referential, like a serpent eating its own tail. Debt created money. Money created consumption. Consumption demanded more debt, and so the spiral spun faster. Today, the world's total debt has surpassed $300 trillion. That's more than 3 times the planet's annual output. A number so vast it no longer feels real. And that's precisely the danger, because when numbers lose meaning, morality follows. Every empire in history reached a moment like this, when the figures became abstract, when leaders convinced themselves that ratios didn't matter, when citizens stopped caring as long as the lights stayed on. But beneath the surface, something always shifts. Confidence cracks, currencies tremble, and suddenly, what was once manageable becomes impossible to contain. The same tremor that once ran through Rome's mint, Spain's treasury, and France's palace walls now hums beneath our digital systems and global markets. The same overconfidence that bankrupted kings now fuels policymakers and investors who swear that this time is different. But history whispers otherwise, because the debt spiral never ends with prosperity. It ends with a reckoning. Quiet at first, then absolute. The pattern didn't end. It just changed flags. Every generation believes it's smarter than the last, that technology has conquered the old laws of economics, that prosperity can be coded, streamed, or printed on command. But gravity still exists, even for money. Today, the empire at the center of the financial world stands on the same fragile foundation that buried every power before it: belief. The United States once built real things: steel, ships, cities. Now, it builds credit. It manufactures debt, exports inflation, and calls it growth. Its most valuable product is the promise to pay later, and that promise has become the cornerstone of the global system. For decades, the world trusted the dollar. It was stability, safety, certainty, the gold of the digital age. Nations held it in reserves. Companies borrowed in it, People saved in it. But trust is a delicate currency, and over time, it's been spent faster than dollars could be printed. The numbers no longer inspire confidence. They provoke disbelief. $36 trillion in federal debt. Over $200 trillion in unfunded liabilities, promises to future generations that cannot be mathematically kept. A deficit that grows by billions each day. Each administration swears it will fix it. Each one adds more because, in a democracy, the easiest way to buy peace is to borrow from tomorrow. Bread and circuses have become credit cards and entertainment subscriptions. The illusion of stability remains for now. But beneath the glitter, the structure groans. The pattern is familiar. Empires always rot from within. Before they're conquered from without, debt erodes discipline. Inflation erodes faith, and corruption erodes trust. When citizens no longer believe in sacrifice, governments must bribe them with comfort. When markets no longer believe in growth, central banks must invent it with liquidity. Money printing becomes policy. Policy becomes addiction. Addiction becomes identity. And once identity is debt, collapse is inevitable. Consider the last 20 years. After every crisis.com bubble, housing crash, pandemic, the response has been the same. Print. Lower the rates. Stimulate. Save the economy by diluting its foundation. Each bailout bought time, not stability. Each rescue inflated the next bubble. What began as an emergency measure became standard operating procedure. Debt became not the exception, but the definition of normal. We call it quantitative easing. History calls it debasement. The Romans melted their silver. We click Approve transaction. Different tools, same sin. The most dangerous illusion of all is confidence without consequence. We believe the Federal Reserve can control the uncontrollable, that markets can rise forever, that an economy powered by consumption can survive without production. But the numbers tell another story. Manufacturing, outsourced, infrastructure, crumbling. Household debt record high. Savings record low. And still, the spending continues. Each dollar borrowed buys less. Each promise made weighs more. And yet, the machine spins faster because stopping it would expose the truth. That the empire has traded discipline for dependence, innovation for illusion, faith for debt. Even the psychology of money has changed. What once symbolized work now represents entitlement. Credit cards are no longer tools of convenience, they're lifelines. People don't ask if they should borrow, they ask how much. Every generation is born deeper in the hole. And because debt is invisible, the chains are too. Inflation becomes the quiet thief, stealing hours of labor, months of savings, years of effort. And when the public finally feels the theft, it's too late. They riot over prices, not realizing the real crime was committed decades before in boardrooms and voting booths where short-term pleasure outweighed long-term pain. Globally, the dollar's dominance is being tested. Nations once loyal to its strength now explore alternatives, gold. Digital currencies, alliances built on shared resentment. The BRICS bloc speaks of a new financial order. China trades oil for yuan, and whispers of a post-dollar world grow louder. It's not a sudden rebellion. It's the quiet erosion of faith, the same process that toppled every reserve currency before it. From Rome's denarius to Spain's real to Britain's pound, the transition was never explosive. It was gradual, invisible, then all at once. And while leaders assure the public that the fundamentals are strong, history smirks. That phrase has been spoken by every empire on the eve of its reckoning. Confidence is not the same as solvency, and optimism is not the same as stability. Today's markets behave like addicts, reacting not to value, but to stimulus. They rise when money is cheap and collapse when discipline returns. The free market is no longer free, it's medicated. And like all patients who rely on medication to survive, withdrawal will be deadly. The danger isn't just economic, it's spiritual. The debt changes people. It trains societies to crave without earning, to promise without intending to keep, to consume without creating. And when that mindset infects a civilization, collapse becomes moral before it becomes financial. You can see it in the culture, the worship of luxury without labor, status without substance, virtue without value. The debt isn't only on the balance sheet, it's in the soul. When nations forget the link between work and reward, history reintroduces it violently. Every empire reaches a moment when the bills come due. For America, that moment is approaching. Interest payments on the national debt now exceed defense spending. Soon, they'll rival the entire federal budget. That's not a forecast. That's arithmetic. And when the cost of yesterday consumes the promise of tomorrow, the spiral tightens. Leaders will blame politics. Economists will call it transitory. Citizens will protest. But none will admit the truth that the fall began long ago when comfort replaced caution and faith replaced gold. History doesn't punish arrogance immediately. It waits. It allows civilizations to overextend, to believe they've mastered fate, and then, in silence, it collects its debt. Every empire believes it can print its way out until the ink runs dry. And when that day comes, the collapse won't look like war or conquest. It will look like confusion. Markets freezing, currencies flickering, institutions denying the obvious. And somewhere in that silence, the same question will echo again. If debt built the modern world, what will rebuild it when the faith is gone? Collapse is not the end. It's the correction. It's history reminding us that nothing grows forever. Not trees, not empires, not debt. Every great fall in history has also been a beginning. When Rome burned, Europe was born. When Britain's colonies broke away, America emerged. When the old systems rot, space opens for something new. But only those who understand the pattern survive the transition. The first lesson is simple. Reality always wins. You can lie to people. You can even lie to markets. But you cannot lie to arithmetic. Every empire thought it could bend the rules, spend more than it earned, borrow more than it produced, consume more than it created. And every empire discovered that numbers, like gravity, always bring you back to Earth. That's why survival begins not with wealth, but with clarity. Seeing the illusion for what it is, a system built on confidence, not value, faith, not production, symbols, not substance. Once you understand that, the world stops being terrifying because you stop expecting it to stay the same. The second lesson, debt is not just an economic trap, it's a psychological one. It seduces you into believing you can have now and pay later. It robs the future of meaning. And a person or a nation that no longer believes in tomorrow cannot build anything that lasts. That's why the first step toward freedom is not financial, it's mental. Learn to delay gratification. Learn to live within your means. Learn to earn before you spend. These are not old-fashioned virtues. They are survival skills in an age addicted to illusion. The third lesson, diversify your foundations. No empire has ever fallen for a single reason. They fall because they place all their faith in one thing, one army, one god, one currency, one story. And when that story breaks, they have nothing left. So build systems that don't depend on a single promise. Learn skills that can't be inflated away. Hold assets that exist outside paper, things you can touch, build, or grow. And most importantly, cultivate communities that value truth over comfort. Because when the old world wobbles, truth becomes the rarest form of currency. The fourth lesson, see collapse not as punishment, but purification. Throughout history, crises have burned away what was false. They strip societies down to what's real: work, trust, creativity, and courage. Those who cling to illusion perish. Those who adapt endure. After Rome fell, small communities of monks preserved knowledge that would later rebuild civilization. After Britain's empire crumbled, a generation of entrepreneurs and thinkers reshaped the modern world. Even after financial crashes, new industries always emerge from the ruins, stronger, simpler, and more honest. That's how history renews itself. Collapse clears the stage. Resilience writes the next act. So what does survival look like in our age? It's not hoarding gold or hiding underground. It's learning how to think clearly when everyone else is panicking. It's staying curious, useful, and flexible when the old systems start to freeze. It's building value that doesn't depend on borrowed faith, your skills, your integrity, your ability to create something people truly need. Because when the world's illusions burn away, what remains are people who can still solve problems, fix things, teach others, grow food, write code, repair trust. That is real wealth. That is civilization in seed form. The final lesson, remember the cycle and break it personally, even if the world won't. You can't stop nations from overspending or printing money, but you can stop yourself from doing it. You can build your own small empire of discipline, knowledge, and truth. Because survival is not about waiting for collapse. It's about becoming someone who doesn't collapse with it. If this opened your eyes, subscribe. History isn't repeating, it's warning. And if you believe these stories deserve to be told, please like and share. It helps me keep doing this full time. This is Wealth and Ruins, where history meets the cost of power.